A massive welcome back. Once more, I wanted to apologise for there being a gap between this episode and the former. Though as you may recall from the outro of the last episode, I was due to planeswalk to the Maple North, as I tend to do, and unfortunately will continue to do so. With that in mind, we at Midnight Magic have found a way to keep up the consistency of these lore videos, as far as getting them up on a regular schedule is concerned, even with that constant walking. There was going to be more info on that, but we've actually decided to change to the kind of remedy to that right here and now, which is we've gone from a visual kind of abridgment to this audio podcast-esque type thing, which we feel is going to be a lot more helpful for the consistency. And hopefully the change to this format isn't too jarring and you enjoy the Exploring the Multiverse series just as much with this new format. So, with that out the way, let's get on with and have a recap from what happened in the last episode with the lore. So, in the last episode, Yawgmoth's efforts to heal the Halcyon citizens of the degenerative plague, Phyrexian, have seen him rise higher and higher in political, military, and symbolic status since arriving in the city, and the Elder Council of Halcyon's elders are becoming more and more reliant on his guidance. Yawgmoth's personal military continues to grow in the form of his personal healers, the Halcyon Guard, and the reformed Untouchables, while the people of Halcyon perceive him as a symbol of hope which rivals the embodiment of Rebecca's temple. Added to that, he now wields a control panel adorned with power stones, which is linked to all the technology in the city. With all this, coupled with his tenacity, Yawgmoth quells the deadliest riot to ever storm through the capital, solidifying the need for his high status and effectively concreting his place. While this is occurring, Rebecca herself is becoming further torn between her adoration for Yawgmoth and her dedication to her deteriorating husband, whose body is in a losing war with the Phyrexian. Even a visit from a planeswalker does nothing to help the genius of Halcyon. Though this planeswalker, Dyfed, becomes the most valuable multiverse-wide scout for Yawgmoth, searching for a plane where the Thran people can be brought to divinity, or so he claims. It took some time for Halcyon to heal from the wounds inflicted upon it in the uprising of the Untouchables. The city's sky was stained black with smoke from funeral pyres, and the ashes of the fallen swirled on the breeze and fell on the living. The stench of death was as common as the bloodstains on the cobblestones of the city streets. Months later, the capital fell into a deep mourning for their deceased. Yawgmoth, in his twisted wisdom, believed the people should not be mourning, but instead celebrating the conquering of the sickened rebels and the rebuilding of the city, and so turned the city's focus to a festival. A feast was held, dedicated to Rebecca's Temple of Hope hanging in the sky and shimmering like a guardian sun. Yawgmoth was, of course, a guest of renown and honour at these festivities. Not all was joyous, however, as ambassadors from the various reaches of Dominaria had heard of Yawgmoth's rising status in Halcyon with sheer dread, and had travelled to the city. The delegates covered the vast varieties of living beings within Dominaria: elves, dwarves, the Catkin Leonin, Minotaurs, Vashino, and humans from the other states of the Thran. They were entities different in physiology, yet they were united in their disgust for Yawgmoth and their desire to see him removed from his status. The ambassadors came armed with information on how Yawgmoth spent his time during his previous exile. He had travelled the lands of Dominaria, seeking out and researching a multitude of ailments and diseases that had infected the various races. In doing so, there were accounts of Yawgmoth pushing to extreme lengths to explore the intricacies of infection and illness, resulting in mutilations to fatalities. Moreover, the reports included how Yawgmoth manipulated the sickened into rebelling, inciting conflict, and then pounced on the opportunity illness provided to meet his own ends. In other words, exactly what he was in the process of doing in the capital of the Thran. The Dominarian ambassadors delivered an ultimatum to the city-states of the Thran: remove Yawgmoth or face war. Rebek was outraged by the accusations and was steadfast in Yugmoth's defense. The Council of Elders, however, had no choice but to put the ultimatum to a vote. The result was a 50-50 split between keeping Yugmoth and removing him. Only 2 members of the council had yet to vote, Rebek and Yugmoth themselves. Of course, this meant the final conclusion to the vote was in favour of Yugmoth's continued presence in the capital. A fateful decision, as it also meant war against the former allies of Halcyon, including a number of its own fellow Thran states. In response to the audacity of the ambassadors and the council's desire to entertain their demands, Yugmoth overthrows the council and imprisons them alongside the ambassadors. The uninhibited plain of Marcadia was to become their prison, courtesy of Dyfed's planeswalking ability. Now, Yugmoth had utter dominance over the Thran capital in every conceivable way, in every conceivable angle, and he readied Halcyon and the remaining city-states that had supported him for the upcoming civil war. Whilst in the midst of war preparations, Yugmoth descended to the Caves of the Damned with a worsening and wheelchair-bound Glacian. The genius artificer of Halcyon had been mercilessly pummeled by the Thysis. It had robbed his body of its function, and his mind was soon to follow. Gix greeted them, the overseer of the repurposed Caves of the Damned, a now sterile environment wherein the sick are experimented on and held in quarantine. Yugmoth once more promises Rebek to discover the meaning behind Glacian's stubborn condition and eradicate it. He is distracted in this endeavour, however, as Dyfed delivers the most promising news Yugmoth has ever hoped to hear. She has discovered the ideal plane fitting to Yugmoth's specifications, a plane unnatural in its harmony between artifice and life, comprised of 9 spheres like layers of skin. It is to become the epicenter of atrocities never before known to the multiverse. Dyfed takes Yugmoth and Rebek in an instant of planeswalking, and there they stand on a mountain outcrop overlooking a sprawling vista of forests. It is here Rebek gets a glimpse of Yugmoth's twisted intentions as he asks her to build a medical infirmary on a distant hillside, where he will bring the Thysis-riddled citizens of Halcyon to heal. Only, Yugmoth plans to not simply cure them of Thysis, but of mortality itself. He wishes to become the god of this layered plane, with his inhabitants free of death and stronger than the mewling humans they currently are and ever will be. Before Rebek has a chance to comprehend Yugmoth's radical ideals, Dyfed transports them to the sphere below, under the first layer of this plane. The second sphere is wholly a construct of steel inlaid beams and pillars miles high stretching to the ceiling, physically holding the first sphere up, as well as creating its ecosystem through the metallic veins. The foundation of this plane is of such majestic artifice, Rebek can barely understand it. Much like her, an extraordinarily skilled architect had to have built it. Dyfed confirms this. The plane was created by an ancient, immensely powerful planeswalker. What's more, sentient constructs scuttle around on this layer of the plane, breathing, breeding, self-sufficient in every manner and autonomous, while they maintain the machinery generating the ecosystem of the outer and first layer. Dyfed takes Yugmoth and Rebek to the deepest layer next, the 9th sphere. It is an enclosed shell of darkness and void, with the stank of decay and death tickling their nostrils. They stand on the festering remains of a dragon, a stolen form which the planeswalker who crafted this world used and subsequently perished in. Dyfed explains that the planeswalker died around a month ago, and its magnum opus is sure to rot along with its corpse. That is, unless another was to come along and serve as the new master of the plane, merging with its essence of life within this deepest sphere. That would mean that they would be consumed by it to give it eternal sustenance. It goes without saying, Yugmoth was just such a willing being. utterly able to give himself to this plane and become the literal heart of it. However, before he is able to become the god of this plane, there is the matter of the war back on Dominaria. He asks Dyfed to design and link a portal from this plane to Dominaria, specifically a direct gate to the Caves of the Damned, now his infirmary. Before they return to Dominaria, however, Yawgmoth needs to give this plane a name, something derived from its planned purpose, a place of progressive generation, not degeneration such as is caused by physis, but forward, stronger generation. The Thran term for such a thing is Phyrexian, and with a little modification, Yawgmoth christens the plane Phyrexia. Alrighty, so there we go for this episode. As you've probably no doubt noticed, and as I mentioned in the intro, the format for these videos is now not so much videos, but more of an audio experience. And I hope that you enjoyed it as much, and it was just equally as enjoyable as it always has been. If there is anything you think that can be improved, or you've got any comments or maybe advice, please don't be afraid to put them in the comments section below, and we'll try and cater to whatever you feel is best. I think this is pretty positive and productive change, and hopefully it can keep these episodes on a more regular schedule. So back to the lore, Yawgmoth has essentially dropped the subtlety and the subterfuge to aggressively pursue his ideals now, and in doing so, everyone around him is beginning to realise how crazy and dangerous he truly is. He isn't one of the most horrifying Magic the Gathering big bags for nothing after all. Unfortunately for the Thran, their era was the perfect germination grounds for Yawgmoth's vision, and as a result, their nation is fracturing. War is on the horizon, and in the next episode, war is here. Until then, keep releasing your untapped potential.